Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Nash, AAPG, and I'm just thrilled today to be able to introduce everybody to a DPA ethical considerations or an ethics webinar. And I just want to mention that you will be getting a link to the recording. We're recording now. And also I will have a link so that if you would like to get your ethics continuing education credits, you'll have that. Oh, yay, Rachelle's here. She's probably having a heart attack. We've had such Zoom gremlins today, and it's just been really crazy. So some people have had to absolutely go through and reinstall completely, which has been, that was my case, and it was very nerve-wracking. But I just wanted to say welcome. And one of the things that's really exciting about today is that this is our first ethics webinar that has to do with the environment, and also sustainability. So I'm really, really excited and proud of that. And also, this is our first one in a DPA ethics webinar where we have somebody from Australia. So we have with Rachelle Kernen. Dr. Kernen is coming in from Australia, and our soon-to-be doctor, Haagsma, is here from Western Michigan, and we have our multifaceted Julian Chenin, who's a graduate of the University of Oklahoma. He's here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and let them begin.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Susan. Dr. Nash, we really appreciate you helping us set up the webinar, and thank you for everyone for attending today. We have a really exciting kind of panel that's set up today, and something a little different, because typically when we think of geoscience, these are kind of two topics we don't necessarily always think about. And so today we have a soon-to-be Dr. Autumn Haagsma, who will be talking about some different CCS practices. And she's currently the director of the Michigan Geological Repository for Research and Education, or MGRRE for short. She's also the assistant director for the Michigan Geological Survey. So she is really engaged in a lot of carbon sequestration, energy storage, but also community and stakeholder engagement and outreach, similar to what Dr. Kernan is currently leading. So Dr. Kernan, she's a South Australian representative for Women in Earth and Environmental Sciences Australia, so WOMEESA for short. And she's also a 2023 through 2024 Superstar of STEM through the Science and Technology of Australia. She's a postdoctoral fellow doing research through the Global Talent Visa, and she's specifically looking at sedimentology, stratigraphy, as well as salt-sediment interaction for both carbon dioxide storage, or CO2, as well as hydrogen storage. But today she'll be talking about some of the work that she's been engaging in with the Indigenous voices and communities within Australia. So she's been kind of partnering with them, listening, studying, and learning. And today she'll be presenting some of her key takeaways and her learnings from that. So with that being said, I'd like to now pass on the floor to Dr. Kernan, who will take us through her presentation and kind of share some of the different lessons that she's learned. Following those presentations, we'll then have a 15-minute Q&A where we can have an interactive discussion, kind of learn together on what it means to have the intersection of geosciences, sustainability, as well as ethical considerations. So Dr. Kernan, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Julian, so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. And thank you for Susan and Autumn for the invitation. I really appreciate it. So to get started today, I'm going to give a talk on my non-research topics per se. This is in tandem to the research that I conduct. So I won't have anything technical today, but these are just ethical considerations for people to think about undertaking while they conduct field work. So I hope that context makes sense. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Julian, do you have the control to share?
I do. Let's see.
Because I don't believe I have it.
Okay. I wonder if I can make you.
I made you a co-host, Rachelle. You should be able to.
Autumn, can you confirm if you're able to share your screen as well, or?
So I've made both of you co-hosts.
Yeah, it looks like I can.
I'm not logged in through the app. I'm logged in through the browser. So I'm wondering if that has something to do.
Oh, okay. So why
Yeah.
don't you
can
go
sh-
ahead and email the presentation if
Okay.
she doesn't already have it, and then in the meantime, why don't we switch over to Autumn and we'll go with you.
Okay.
All right.
Cool.
I will-
Sure.
Okay, perfect.
All right, let's see if I can get mine to share here.
Yeah, thanks for being flexible,
Oh, not a problem.
dealing with Zoom gremlins.
How about
Perfect.
that?
So we see it in kind of the slide deck mode. Here we go. It's
There we
in
go.
presentation mode,
All right, I'm sure it's a little bit of a lag, but
but we do have some boxes obscuring the screen. I'm not sure if maybe the
yeah,
chat window is open.
boxes. Let me hide the pictures. Did that help? Is
Yeah.
that better?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone. So as Julian and Susan introduced me, I'm Autumn Haagsma. I am going to start by saying that I am a geologist, and that I consider myself on the learning journey when it comes to ethical considerations, societal considerations, things like environmental justice and community impact. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of these things, but I would like everyone to recognize that I am learning too, and I'm excited to have these types of conversations. So I want to tell you first a little bit about MGRE. So that's the Michigan Geological Repository for Research and Education, which is a little bit long, but MGRE for short. I joined MGRE in January, and I'm really excited to be there because we do a lot of really cool things. So I come from a purely research background, so now I have the opportunity to branch out and try a lot more things. So we do things not just on research, but I get to work with a lot of students and young professionals and help them in their geoscience careers. We work with educators to incorporate geology and earth science into curriculum. And largely we work to preserve our geologic data and information. So we have this giant warehouse of subsurface cores and surface cores and cuttings. It's overflowing at the moment with this awesome data. And really then is how do we make that available and accessible to all different audiences. The next thing are a couple of definitions. I'll be using these throughout the presentation. So starting with CCUS. So my background is largely in carbon sequestration. So CCUS, for those that don't know, stands for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And we're going to be talking about ethics, especially as it pertains to geosciences and mostly on the CCUS side for me. But let's talk about the definition of what that means. I think this was really nicely defined by the UK Geological Society as values which underpin appropriate behaviors and practices wherever human activities interact with the Earth system. Other definitions to be aware of are things like environmental justice. So that's been a really big topic, especially in the US lately, and that's defined as a social movement to address environmental injustice. And this is typically happening in poor or disadvantaged communities that are harmed by human activities. And these things can be like hazardous waste, pollution, land use. Another definition is linking back to that are disadvantaged communities. So this is a community that has reached a defined threshold, and there's different types of thresholds, but they can be environmental or climate, socioeconomic, and these are defined at a federal level. And then another initiative that the US federal government is doing is called the Justice 40. And this is where we're trying to deliver at least 40% of the benefits from any of the federal investments. So these include things like the Department of Energy research grants. So tying back, benefits to disadvantaged communities. For those of you who aren't aware of what CCUS is, I wanted to give you a really quick overview, as in one slide, and that there's really three key components to CCUS. One is the capture, so where are you getting your CO2 and how are you capturing it? And then transportation is how you're going to get it from your capture facility to where the best storage is. And then storage can be onshore or offshore. It could be in depleted oil and gas fields, saline reservoirs, and even porous basalts. So thinking about CCUS when looking at maybe like your total impact, your footprint of a project, it's going to encompass all of the above. So if you're lucky enough to have storage right on site where you're capturing it, you're going to have a much smaller footprint. But if you have to transport that a larger distance, then your potential impact range is going to be much larger. So looking at CCUS, you're going to hear and see a lot of different opinions, different beliefs, and oftentimes some misconceptions. First thing I did when I heard about this, was invited for this presentation, is I'm going to go pull some headlines, some catchy headlines. So I popped into Google and said CCUS headlines and see what pops up. So things like billions of federal dollars are poured into failure. Top 5 reasons why CCS is bogus. A potential study shows carbon sequestration can cause quakes, things like that. So being aware of different messages that are being put out there is really important. I'm going to share an example of this from the West Virginia Geological and Economic Survey. They were kind enough to share this information with us. They gave this presentation a couple of weeks ago now, and I was really inspired by what they were showing. So first is that they received a letter in regards to Class 6 permitting. And Class 6, for those that don't know, is the type of well classification for CO2 storage. So they received this letter that was signed by many different organizations that expressed their concerns that the survey did not have the experience or the capacity to oversee Class 6 permits. Within this letter, there are a couple of really 3 key topics to focus on. Is that the regulators didn't have sufficient capacity and funding to administer the program, that they're understaffed, and that it would only further strain the regulatory capacity, lack of experience, and that it would only dilute environmental justice protections. So thinking back on CCUS in the United States, I actually think the project in West Virginia was probably the first demonstration project in the United States. So they had experience from the very beginning on how to safely inject, monitor, go through the permitting process. So it's very interesting to see the things that aren't well researched and where those concerns are coming from. So here are a few things that I've heard internally, let's say often within AAPG, different things that people have said to me personally. A common one that I've heard is that it's a false narrative as far as the future of CCUS, that there's going to be no jobs, that there's no economics to support this. On the flip side of that, I've also heard folks in our group say CCUS will provide numerous opportunities for jobs, especially to transition from oil and gas. I've heard CCUS is just an excuse to prolong oil and gas, and that CCUS is necessary to meet climate and energy goals, and that CCUS will never work at scale. So not only are you getting mixed messages, I think in the media from public organizations, but also within our own, network of geoscientists. Now, looking at this from maybe a little more technical point of view, there has been a couple of studies that look at the societal acceptance of CCUS. This one is a Dutch study looking largely at different types of articles, who published those articles, and what was the tone of those articles. And depending on the bin here, you kind of got different results where the government side of things was largely positive perspective, but also very largely neutral. When you look at industry, it was very positively received, but environmental NGOs was very negatively received. Similarly, there's a Chinese study that looked more at what are the people's concerns, when looking at CCUS. Things like a big concern identified was leakage of CO2 from pipelines and how that could impact local and natural ecosystems. Things like extra energy consumption that might be needed to sustain CO2 capture, and then leakage, of course, from how that could impact our health. So let's talk about then what are some of these technical risks. With any type of industry, there's always going to be risks, and we can't really bury our head in the sand and pretend that they don't exist, but it's important to start by talking about them and recognizing what they are and how we can mitigate them, and then how do we communicate that with others. So there's the biggest risk here is the leakage risk, that there's potential pathways where CO2 can leak, and that can go into the groundwater, that could go into the surface, and we need to protect both of those systems. Will CO2 cause induced seismicity? Do you know enough about the structure? Could you reactivate old faults, or even cause fracturing if you don't know the geomechanics of your system? And then there's things like the economic risks, where the costs maybe are more than anticipated. What about societal impacts? Thinking about, again, that big picture, what is that footprint of your project? What are the potential risks? And if those risks happen, how could you impact a community? So if you had a leakage, then you could have some sort of environmental impact from that. What about the actual industrial footprint? Could you cause more traffic or more noise, or even eyesores, from equipment, pipeline? What about energy costs? So these are all things you really need to think about, but also how to communicate that. And equally, there are just as many, if not more positive potential impacts on a society, including, some of the top things like improved air quality, creation of jobs, access to clean and reliable energy. I'm going to read a few statements off to everybody, and I really want you to think about your reaction to them. So first is that CO2 will leak into my water and it will turn it into acid. CO2 will come back to the surface and make us sick. It will kill my crops and it will kill my cows. You are taking too much CO2 away and it will kill the vegetation. You will cause a giant earthquake. CCUS will actually cause more pollution. Now, again, these are all statements that I've heard that I've heard people say. And I want everyone to take a moment and feel free to use your reactions. Wave your hand, thumbs up, anything. How did you react to this? You don't have to put it in the chat or anything, but if you laughed at any of these statements, or if you rolled your eyes at them, or kind of scoffed, or shook your head in disbelief, or even agreed with some of them, think about your reaction and how that might be perceived. And that's going to take you into the next step here. So, with no judgment here, as I said, I'm a learner. I'm coming at this with a learner mindset. I would say earlier in my career, I would certainly have had a reaction like, that's ridiculous. That's not going to happen. But think about that from the other person's perspective, and start with a learner mindset or a growth mindset. There's different names for the same type of terminology here. Is that starting with that all concerns are valid, and understand where those concerns are coming from. Oftentimes concerns are coming from a place of ignorance, or the want and the need to protect themselves, protect their families, their communities. And when you are engaging with people, then you need to start by going into a situation to learn. You're not there to judge. You're not there to, to laugh at any strange comments, but ask questions, understand what are their concerns, what are their priorities, what's important to an individual and to a community. I'm going to share a couple other things here is that along my learning journey, some things that I've come across, especially when I've been researching more on the environmental justice aspects, is something called the Haagsma principles. So in 1946, there's 40 people of color that came together, and they had different backgrounds and came from different countries. And it was part of a working group on globalization and trade. So this meeting was hosted by the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice. And really the goal was to come up with a set of principles or understandings between all these different participants because of their different cultures, politics, and organizations. So those include things like being inclusive, putting an emphasis on bottom-up organization, letting people speak for themselves, working together in solidarity and mutuality, building just relationships amongst themselves or ourselves, and commitment to self-transformation. Similarly, if you look at other types of principles for stakeholder or community engagement, you're going to find some similarities. And here's a handful of the ones that are similar across these different strategies, like participation, consultation. So consultation in the way of bringing in a specialist. As I keep saying, I'm a geologist. This is, community engagement isn't what I was trained to do. So I will bring in people and talk to people who are experts in that and get feedback and support, collaboration. So making these projects not just I'm coming in and this is what I'm doing, but more of how can we work together to make this successful and meaningful and a positive impact for your community. Sharing information, not hiding things, making things public, giving communities and people empowerment. And a lot of that will come through collaboration and participation, two-way communication, and then working together to establish processes and workflows that are comfortable to both parties. Another thing I want to touch base on here is that within the US, especially with any of our federal grants, they're requiring what's called these community benefit plans. And there are things like diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, Justice 40, environmental justice, quality jobs and economics, and community and stakeholder engagement. And when thinking about each one of these things, really a strategy for an approach is how to integrate all of these together. It should really be a single plan to address all of these because they're also very interconnected, and that your plans are going to evolve over time as your project grows, as you move from what your plans are in an early phase to, construction and operation is going to be different throughout. I'm going to give a couple of examples now. One from our Michigan Geological Survey that we've been working with our local tribal nation. So we've given multiple presentations, most recently to an annual meeting of the United Tribes of Michigan. And here we not only discuss and show our work, but we try to talk about the benefits, and then we seek that feedback on how will this help you? What are your concerns? What are you not interested in? And really, how can we, make our research most impactful and applicable to you. And this actually had led to receiving a wonderful support letter from the United Tribes of Michigan and helped us develop a meaningful relationship moving forward. And I'm just going to highlight this text because I know the other parts are probably hard to see, is that the tribe believe that the information developed in an expanded survey will assist tribes in protecting our water resources from any potential activities that could cause harm to those resources. So this was in our efforts to secure state funding so that we could expand our geological survey and can continue our research. Another example of what we do is that we have a very broad outreach program, and we focus different activities so that we reach all these different audiences. For example, actually just last week, we had a workshop targeted towards industry and research, and we also had several state employees that came as well. We have a handful of pictures here from that, where we had about 109 people in our core warehouse, where we got to show some new science and then get our hands on the rocks. We host tours as well and give a lot of presentations, and these include things like to our regulators and policy makers and legislators. So it's important not just to show the research, but give them an opportunity to participate. So here's one of our local legislators who was very excited to jump in and try our bicycle pump display, where you get to push some air into different rocks and start to understand some of those processes that aren't necessarily easy to understand for non-geoscientists. We have a program called For Kids, and this is where we target our K through 12 outreach and education. And we usually reach somewhere between 5,000 to 15,000 students a year, and then thousands of general public. So we have a couple of examples here. Again, the same bicycle pump display, teaching some kids, but we also work with educators. So going out into the field and showing them, in real life, what are these rocks that we're talking about? And then we work with a lot of other universities to provide the data and information that's needed for students to learn. There's our co-speaker, Rachelle Kernen, checking out some really cool orange salt that we found in a couple of our cores. And then to reach more broadly and maybe more of a general public to all of our audiences are things like quarterly newsletter, social media. We have a really active YouTube channel now as well. So we really target these different activities to cater to specific audiences. And our goal here then is to establish ourselves as a trustworthy and unbiased source for data and information. So I'm going to end where I started with a definition. So going back to ethics and geosciences, where this is the values which underpin appropriate behaviors and practices wherever human activities interact with the Earth systems. I think largely we focus so much on the practices, and that comes in with our regulations. How are we constructing a well? Are we doing appropriate technology to monitor and mitigate? But we have to put equal emphasis on our behaviors. How are we going to interact with people and communities and society? And can we do that in an ethical and moral way so that we can have a very successful collaborative projects moving forward. With that, I will end, and I'll hand off the reins to Rachelle Kernen next. For those that have a phone, you feel free to take a picture of our QR code here. As I mentioned, all those different outreach activities that we do, this provides links to all of those and all of the like our newsletter, YouTube channel, other types of social media avenues can all be found on there.
Great. Well, thank you. And I think that Julian is going to drive and Rachelle will present. So this is perfect.
Absolutely. Okay, let me just share the screen here. All right. Does that look okay for everyone?
That's great.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Wonderful.
All right, so just to restart, my name is Rachelle Kernen. I am currently a postdoc with the Institute for Sustainability, Energy and Resources at the University of Adelaide, which is located in South Australia. Today, I don't have a technical talk for you, but I have more of the soft skills that I've undertaken as part of my postdoc research, field research. So these are just some considerations to think about if you conduct field research at any point, and there's an opportunity to perhaps engage with Indigenous communities along the way. Okay, next slide. So whenever we begin a presentation in Australia, this is something that is very common practice. Nearly everybody engages in this, and this is called acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Australia. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I live, where my university is located, and where I conduct my research. I pay my respects to ancestors and elders past, present, and emerging. I am committed to honoring Australian, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people's unique cultural and spiritual relationships to the land, waters, and seas, and their rich contributions to society. So this is something that it's not a political statement in Australia. It is just something that is expected and that you do. And if you don't engage in it, people would think that was kind of strange. So just showing you the difference between how we do things in the US and just a different country. Next slide, please. So just to start off with, this is the heaviest slide that I have. Here in Australia, the Aboriginal interaction with Europeans has been a very long, tortuous history. I would like to acknowledge that they've experienced what I consider to be extreme discrimination, and for all intents and purposes, what their population has undergone over the last 250 years has been genocide. They comprise only about 2% of the national population now, and they were enslaved and made to be indentured servants well into the middle of the 20th century. They weren't considered or allowed to have the right to vote until 1962. And then they weren't actually considered to be Australian citizens until 1967. Around that time is when they were able to have a driver's license, have bank accounts, own property, things like that. So it's a really dark and sad history. So just an acknowledgement of that. And this is part of the reason why there's a big movement, and it has been this way in Australia for quite some time, to engage with these people and try to give back to them in some way. Next slide, please. So this is a formal Indigenous map of Australia. It's great. It's comes digitally, or you can actually go. It's available, widely available in the airport. You can get it in some like nature parks, things like that. And you can see that there are a ton of different Aboriginal communities across Australia. Please note that these are a Western attempt to place boundaries over the map of an ancient civilization, one of the oldest civilizations on the planet. So this would be like our interpretation of it. In reality, these boundaries would have crossed, would have changed through time, and of course would have maybe had seasonal variations as well. So going back to my acknowledgement of country, there are 3 places I'd like to tell you about. So it's where I live, which is on Ninninjeri Aboriginal land. Where I work is on Ghana Aboriginal land, and then where I conduct my research is on Andamuntna. So I'll go from south to north, and you can see that on the figure with the red stars. Next slide. So where I live, Ninninjeri country. So this has been inhabited since about 8,000 BCE, so a really long time ago. This is the evidence that archaeologists currently have to date. What the term means is belonging to men, and it refers to a tribal constellation. This is the first South Australian Aboriginal people to work closely with Europeans in a large-scale economic operations. So they worked as farmers, whalers, and laborers. There are reports that they were treated more as equals. I would take that with a grain of salt, not to our standards, what we would be considered equal and fairly. But for that time, I think they were treated off a lot better. And today, as a result of that interaction, they are really well integrated with society here. They're very mixed genetically with European heritage, and they have businesses here. It feels very natural and organic. So this is where I live. This is an amazing place. I live about 5 kilometers from the Southern Ocean. The other side of the ocean is Antarctica, so it's a really cold ocean. It's a really beautiful area. They were employed to sell mostly whale oil. There are whales still today that actually come up to the coast at certain times of the year. And then they would also participate in meat, gin, tobacco trade as well. Next slide. So where I work, this is Ghana country. This is approximately 60 kilometers to the north in a geographical area called the Adelaide Plain. So you actually have to climb up a small mountain range and then drop down into another basin. This culture, Ghana culture, and language have essentially been destroyed. So this is where the Adelaide metropolitan area is located. Basically, it's the highest densely populated area in the state of Southern Australia. It's completely a regular normal city with suburbia, and that growth has completely decimated the culture and really any evidence of archaeology or artifacts. This began in one of the waves of British colonization in 1836. They would have been several thousand people, but currently are down to only about 700 people by the time that it was when they established Adelaide, or the formal British colony that we now call Adelaide. The material culture, so any objects or spears, boomerangs, nets, things that they would have used are extremely rare, and you basically can't really find them at all. Everything that was here has either been destroyed or is probably in a museum somewhere locally. This culture was hunter-gatherer society, and what was really amazing about this culture is they think that they would actually move depending on the seasons. So Adelaide is a lot warmer than where I live, surprisingly, even though it's only 60 kilometers away. It's actually more tropical, if you will, where I'm more like in a slightly temperate. So because of that, they would live near the coast in the spring for fishing. And then on the onset of winter, when the rainy season would come, they would go into the woodlands for shelter and cover, because sometimes it can actually be quite cold with the rain. And you can see that it's really beautiful area as well on the photo. Next slide, please. And then lastly, where I conduct my research. So this is Andamanthna country. This is about 400 to 500 kilometers north. And this is a contemporary formed group of people. So these are still living in the same places that they have lived for their entire culture. It's an established Aboriginal communities. Their group literally means rock people. And when you go there, it makes sense because it has beautiful mountains of sedimentary rocks, Precambrian sedimentary rocks with salt diapirs, and this is where I conduct my research. So there are missionaries here, or ex-missionaries, if you will. They're called Nepabunna and Igawarta. These are still present today. Aboriginal people, these tribes still live in these, it would be equivalent to a U.S. Reservation. They still live in these areas, and they basically have transformed them and changed them into an eco park. So you can go to these communities and you can rent a house and with very modest accommodation and camping, and you can stay with these people. And this is actually how they earn majority of their income, is through ecotourism. So this is something that's really amazing. There's also a national park in this area called the Ikara Flinders Ranges National Park. It's in and around the geologic feature called Wilpena Pound. It's a doubly plunging syncline that I have on my slide. And the park actually employs people from this group as park rangers, directors. So they're very well integrated within the community, and they've been able to establish and maintain their culture. The reason that they haven't been decimated quite in the same way as the others is simply because they are further away from the coast. They're far enough inland where the British colonies, I mean, of course, they would go into the outback, but they set up their main settlements around the periphery of Australia, close to the sea, where the weather was a bit more optimal, things like that. So, because of this, a lot of, as you go further into the center of Australia, a lot of those Indigenous cultures still live somewhat today as what they would have thousands of years ago, to a certain extent, of course. But you can see the preservation of those cultures and those societies to an extent. And just to note that even though they've been able to preserve their culture, approximately 140 people speak the language there, and it's considered an endangered language. So next slide. So these are some of the steps that I undertook to conduct my research on Andamantan country. So this was approximately a year-long engagement process. And I think this is where field geologists sometimes have maybe some issues, is they want to hurry up and get in the field and get the data and publish. And there's this big pressure to publish, especially in European and Australian academic systems. It's a little bit different than the US. So you have to really be willing to, I wouldn't say give up your time, because it's not that you're giving it up, but to look at it in a different way, that the process and the work that you're doing ahead of time is a relationship that you're working to establish, a long-term relationship, so you can continue to conduct your research ethically, engage with the Indigenous people, and then also translate your research results through effective science communication, so that knowledge and research is actually you're working with the communities to develop it, and then you're also giving back any findings or sort of nuggets of amazing information that you find along the way. So some of the first steps that I did is I actually contacted the Aboriginal Traditional Lands Association. So most Aboriginal groups in Australia have an established corporation where money can come through and then they can distribute it without their communities or throughout their communities. So this was a starting point. It was a complete shot in the dark. I didn't have any contacts there. I just simply sent them an email, an inquiry, to see if I could be connected with someone who would want to work with me. And I explicitly explained what I was doing and where I was wanting to collect rocks, so I could analyze the sediments and actually look at them. So it's all sedimentary rocks. Through that, it took a bit of time. Of course, these things are never fast. It does not operate on Western, and especially not on American timeframes. Living in Australia does not operate on American timeframes. Everything takes longer here, and you have to be willing to talk to people face to face and really engage with them and build trust. So that is something that is fundamentally very different about the culture here than in the US, is it's all about that face-to-face contact, not being on deadlines, not being on timelines, and just be willing to really put your best foot forward and establish a relationship with someone. So over the course of the year, I worked with the corporation. They paired me up with an elder, which is just a woman who's post-retirement age, to work with me. So she grew up in the area that I was collecting rock samples. And she no longer lived there because she couldn't afford it. Basically, white people just live there, and she lives on the outskirts of this area. But through a session with her, after about a year of engaging with her and getting to know her, I was able to set up a cultural session. And this was just I believe it was 3 nights out in the bush. We went camping and rented some cabins. And she shared with us cultural stories of her families, and just told us about her culture and the significance that the rocks have to them, since they are referred to as the rock people. She invited her family members, her extended family. So we put on they call it a yarn, W-A-Y-arn, which is just the name of a gathering for Aboriginal people. And we had a cookout, and it was just this big oral translation of knowledge session over a long weekend. So it was really lovely. I took her to my sites, and she gave me verbal permission to collect the rocks, and then told me to check in with some of her relatives that work at the national park and just to have that added to my permit. So when I go into the national park, either to fly a drone, to measure rocks, to collect rocks, any sort of research related activity, I now have permission, formal permission on a government document issued through the Aboriginal Association and then also through the government of South Australia. So it was a very successful engagement. Not all engagements go this way. It has something to do with the person, but also just where the group is with their general trust or lack of trust with the Western world. So this was a success story. Next slide. So now when I go into collect and do my research, now that I have this established relationship and I'm more embedded with their community, I take my students and any research colleagues that fly in to see me and conduct research with me. We're able to actually go to their cultural center that they have there out in the outback. I encourage people to support these communities by purchasing their beautiful art. They have food, little like food trucks, things like that. And then one of the park rangers, Mick, he is in these photographs. He actually gives cultural tours to tourists where they can see rock paintings, and he'll actually explain to these tourists and to my students like his version of the geology. So these are the people that I continue to work with and continue as I have more research results. I can disseminate to them and work with them. And then also just always say hi. It's like being a part of the community and just having a friend, someone to check in with when you go up and actually conduct the research. Next slide, please. Great, thank you.
Great. So this is wonderful, and we have time for some questions. So I'd like to encourage people to go ahead and open up your screen or your camera and your microphone and just ask the questions just straightforwardly. We do have someone who has their hand up. Let me see.
I see we have Dr. Dodge.
Okay.
I have been working with the Navajo Nation, doing educational outreach with schools on the Navajo Nation. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is make sure that it's not just a one-off, and that if you participate in something that it becomes sustainable. And is that something you feel like you're going to be able to do?
Yeah, I go up. Well, now it's too hot because the seasons are opposite. So I'm not going to go up now till probably April or May next year. But yeah, every time I go up, which this year I probably went up like 6 or 7 times to conduct field work. Every time I go up, I pop in, and I always have people with me. So they will shop at the cultural center or go on a tour, things like that. And I'm in constant contact with them through Facebook and email and call them on the phone. It's almost like having a relative, basically. But yeah, I've maintained all my relationships and I see them every time that I go up there. I make time for it.
Thank you.
Well, I have a quick question. So when we think about the people that are involved in, or the people who are living in Michigan, like Autumn talked about the nations in Michigan, and then obviously Rachelle, you mentioned all of the people that you're working with. My question is, what is the benefit to them of all the studying and all the people, like the surveys and stuff, going in and working on their on the resources? Will it help them, or what's the outcome? Will it help the native populations?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on the type of research, but from the geological survey side, a lot of what we worked on is mapping the superficial geology, so they understand not just what's right under their feet, but also where and how much water resources that they have, and really help them with better access to clean drinking water. I would say that's probably the most immediate benefit right now.
Okay, great. So at least so they know what they have. That's good. I noticed that Terra Argo is here, and I was wondering if Tara would like to open up her mic and ask a question in her camera. Oh, okay. So John Mazzoro says, congratulations and excellent work integrating field geology with support and integration of Australian society to Aboriginal communities that have gone through hard times.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also, there's another a comment from Catherine where it sounds like patience is critical, right? It's kind of that long-term engagement. Autumn and Rachelle, I know you touched on this, and kind of taking that learner's mindset to it, right? And so how do you listen really to the different Indigenous people, their perspective, their stories, so that whatever findings with geoscience can really go back and benefit not just their culture, but also the history as well that they've worked so hard to preserve.
My one of my mentors' favorite things to say is go slow to go fast.
I like that. Kind of building off of that, where do you see the geoscience disciplines evolving from that, right? I know we kind of are earth scientists, right? And studying the earth is at the core of what we do, but a lot of it too is working with people, right? Learning from them. From your respective studies and research that you've been doing, what can we actively do today for the geosciences to kind of expand on the field, right? Are there things that we're missing in school? Are there things that we should kind of consider post-graduation, right? And take into our daily days as an earth scientist? What are your thoughts?
I think introducing these concepts and concerns earlier, these were not on my radar at all when I was in school. Nothing that even came up, until probably later on in my career right now. So, I think starting to maybe working it into curriculum in some way would be really impactful. Yeah. And what do you think, Rachelle?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think this is something that just sustainability, like the general broad topic, and Indigenous cultures, I mean, that can all be, I think, incorporated into elementary school. I know here there's a big shift in the university to have introductory courses, mandatory college level courses. That if you come to this university, you have to take sustainability, things like that, just as your first sort of year of college. I think it's great. I think it's really important. And I think also it's really important for it to be not just us telling them that they tell us. So it's like the role reversal is different. And then also just because, especially here, they, most of them weren't allowed to go to school. Like the older generation wasn't allowed to go to school beyond grade 3. Because they needed them to basically just read and write enough to do heavy labor, and then they didn't want them knowing anything else. They didn't want them to break away and gain a foothold in society. So yeah, it's just really sensitive, and just because these people don't have degrees, that they're not smart, and we can't listen to them. I may have a PhD and I'm able to put together a PowerPoint and say this and that, and they don't have the education background, but that doesn't mean that they don't actually know what's going on. So I think it's really important, like, you can't look at them or evaluate them based off of what we deem as like a Western qualification.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And it's just like the last picture that you shared, right? I mean, if we take a hand lens to the rock, we see something different. But if we listen to the Indigenous cultures, they see something completely different that we dn't think of, right? And that's an opportunity to learn. They're both sides, right? Many different sides. And that kind of ties back to what Tara is saying, kind kind of in the chat, right? You just have to ask to have a seat at the table and be included. So just listen, be present, and learn, because you never know.
Oh, and I think Tara just sent me a direct message. I think she said she has to go and pick up her daughter from school, but she wanted to say that she's encouraged by the approach, and it's a long game, or it's long-term approach.
I see Dr. Dodge has her hand raised.
You said that you have been flying drones. And I know drones are expensive, but NASA has kites that have stabilized platforms for cameras. And if you were to take those out and fly those kites with the Indigenous children or even Indigenous adults, they could collect their own videos of their landscape, and it just might be something interesting to offer, and then they could fly it over their own areas that they were interested in, and the kites are really fun, they're very colorful, they're inexpensive. Anyway, I've been doing that. We did that on the Navajo Nation, and fortunately a hawk flew over to investigate the kite while we were flying it, and that just made it, almost a spiritual experience.
It's amazing.
Well, I just think this is so fascinating. We have just one more minute, so if we can go a little bit longer if people would like, since we had Zoom gremlins, but lots of people saying thank you. And I wonder, so Rebecca or Dr. Dodge mentioned this, and so I was wondering if how both of you might think about the role. If you've mentioned it both, but like okay, I was just say education, but Lynn Carpenter has raised her hand. Lynn, would you like to ask a question or comment?
Oh no, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
No, it's all good.
So, well, I wanted to give a little bit of what I worked with the Bureau of Indian Affairs for many years before I came over to the Forest Service, doing mineral and energy development. And it was that's a long story behind that. But anyway, one of the ways that I found that worked really well when I was first working with a tribe was, and this is back in the 90s before everybody had plotters and maps and stuff, was I'd plot out a topographic map of the reservation, and I'd bring it and I'd just put it on the table, and it was amazing. It was an icebreaker. And you just sit around the table and people would say, oh, this is where I grew up, and this is where my grandmother's house was, and this is where I had my first car accident, or whatever it was. But the main thing for me, it worked. It was such a multifaceted way to have a conversation. First, it was a way to break the ice. Second, I say, where do you not want me to go to do the task that you've asked me to do? And then we could just circle on the map and be X marks. Wouldn't go there I didn't care why, whatever they wanted. And the third thing is I'd be able to give them some of these topographic maps, and then then they'd have tools to have discussions with their own constituents as well, like behind their desk or in the common area or whatever, under the glass table at the conference room, whatever it was a tool for them as well. So I just wanted to comment on that, is spatial understanding and understanding of the landscape is so integral to any society that's been in a spot a long time. And it was just a kind of a nice way to start conversations.
Really makes sense. And I really liked what you said about asking them to identify where not to go, because that's
oh yes. I mean, it was, I literally, I'll put it bluntly, I was a white girl from the government. I mean, there's so many reasons not to trust me. So I just wanted to make sure that they knew that I was not going to go. And I'd also always ask for an escort, just because, for one thing, they know where to go. Secondly, it was just a way for them to keep an eye on me. And I had no problem with that. I totally understood. They had a very valid reason and history for wanting to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like Autumn and Dr. Kernan mentioned, right? It's all about trust. And once you build trust, it becomes a lot easier to build that long-term relationship where you can have, more of those engagements and better understanding the land, the geology, the landscape, but also the cultures as well.
Yeah, just a few comments on that. I think it's really important, at least here, whenever you engage or have an escort, it's expected that you pay them like a proper wage. It would be similar to like an industry consent wage. So we've done that. And
Absolutely.
yeah, because I know for some of them, that's literally their only income. And what's great is if you do it through the Aboriginal Corporation, like the woman that I work with, a lot of that money actually got cycled into like their little tribal communities, and it was distributed throughout, so they could help feed some of the children who've been abandoned by their parents. I mean, this is something that they deal with today. So that was really important. And then another thing is, as a geologist or a field geologist, I think you have to come to terms with maybe giving up a small portion of some of maybe the rocks you want to study. So there are some really culturally sensitive areas that are caves and whatnot, burial sites, things like that, that maybe you would want to study or pair in with your research. But I think we're getting to a point where we have to let them do that. And you have to be willing to kind of forego your ego and let them take over and really drive that conversation and that research. And I know there's conflict with that because people have dedicated years and years, decades of academic work on these sites, but they don't really belong to them. So I think that's just something that we have to get real with ourselves and just really try to work with them, but also be willing to perhaps give up some of, those key outcrops and really let them take over.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, Rachelle, because it kind of borders on what Rebecca was talking about, right? Transferring the science, giving them the means to continue that long-term engagement, right? It's like, well, having our field geology excursions and research, but also kind of passing on the knowledge and methodologies as well so that they can carry on, right? And follow the same lines of research.
Well, this is really a wonderful presentation, and it raises so many different issues, and it also kind of gives a path forward to making things more inclusive and respecting the history and people's rights, and really developing an inclusive teamwork mindset. I just love that.
Absolutely. Any other questions from the audience before we close out and Autumn and Rachelle give some final words, nuggets of advice? Okay. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining the webinar today. Dr. Nash, thank you so much for organizing and hosting. And to everyone, thank you for bearing with us through the Zoom gremlins. So luckily we've overcome them. But I think one of the biggest takeaways today, Autumn, you had shared kind of that definition of what are some of the ethical considerations in geoscience. And just to kind of re-quote that, it's the values which underpin appropriate behaviors and practices wherever human activities intersect with the Earth systems. We saw Dr. Kernan cover her amazing work, a success story, right, with the Indigenous peoples within Australia, but also highlighting some of the geoscience there and passing on the knowledge. We also saw the same with Autumn, right? Her engagements with Magree and the tribal nations within the Michigan Geological Survey. So thank you again for everyone joining us today. Autumn and Rachelle, any final words that you'd like to leave our audience with today?
I'll just say think about your mindset, and I would encourage everyone to find some people they feel comfortable talking, about these issues with, especially people that won't hesitate to check your attitude sometimes.
Yep. Same thing. Just treat people the way you want to be treated, with respect and dignity.
And thank you so much. And I just want to take a moment too to recognize two people in the audience for AAPG. We have our DPA, or our Energy Minerals Division President, Franek Hashuk, is here from, he's at the Kansas Geological Survey. And we also have our president of the Division of Environmental Geosciences, Bert Vogler. So just want to say thank you to both of you. And if you want to open up your cameras and mics and say a few things in support, and that would be great. And I just want to support DEG and EMD as well. And just a reminder, you'll be getting a link to the recording in an email. And thank you again to Dr. Kernan, and also Dr. to be Haagsma, and our esteemed Julian Chenin. Oh, Bert here. Okay, go ahead, Bert.
Well, I just want to thank our speakers, and thanks for acknowledging my presence. The DEG definitely is eager for anyone to join our group and who's already a member of the DEG to step up and help us out if you've got time to do so. So feel free to reach out to me. Thanks, Susan. And again, thanks to our speakers.
Thank you. And Franek probably had another engagement, but he's very much appreciated as well. And I just want to thank everybody again, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Dr. Kernan, for joining us from Australia at such an early hour.
Thank you. It's all good. It's Friday here.